Imagine crossing a valley in silence, under a gray sky, with your troops marching in perfect formation. The ground seems firm, the route safe. But then, in the blink of an eye, everything changes. Screams come out of nowhere. Men vanish into the earth. Horses fall impaled. The terrain, which seemed empty, reveals itself to be a living trap. And you haven't even seen the enemy yet. Did you know the Romans could destroy entire armies without even engaging in direct combat? That's right. While many think of swords, shields, and marching legions, Rome's true power lay in something much darker and more ingenious. Battlefield preparation, meticulously placed traps. Forget what you think you know about Roman combat. Gladii and shields, they're just the tip of the iceberg. The real terror was buried, hidden, waiting. But what were these traps? How did they work? Today, you'll dive into a lesser-known side of Roman military genius, a battlefield where every step could be your last. Brace yourself, because what comes next will completely change how you see the armies of ancient Rome. And it was exactly on this invisible field that the Tribulus came into play. Too small to draw attention, but dangerous enough to stop an entire army. They looked simple. Structures with 3 or 4 sharp points, made of iron or hardened wood, but the secret was in the design. No matter how they landed, one point was always facing up, always, scattered discreetly across the terrain. These objects turned ordinary paths into silent traps. At the Battle of Carrhae, in 53 BC, the Romans faced the Parthians, who had a swift, lethal cavalry equipped with mounted archers and chariots with spinning blades. It was an unstoppable force in open ground. So the Romans covered the ground with these deadly spikes and waited. When the enemy cavalry charged at full speed, the impact was immediate. Wounded horses fell, chariots lost control, piles of bodies formed, screams, dust, and confusion. Speed turned into chaos. The once unstoppable enemy troops now found themselves trapped in a field of invisible suffering. Completely changed the outcome of that battle. These devices were simple, cheap, easy to hide, but the damage they caused was worthy of a full-scale siege. These small pieces of iron weren't meant to kill directly, but to disrupt movement, break formations, and destroy morale. But if the Tribulus was a nightmare for horses, what about traps made specifically for foot soldiers? Imagine a seemingly empty field, but where every step could end with your leg pierced by a stake hidden in tall grass or loose soil. Welcome to the territory of the Stimuli. Visually, they were simple, but there was calculated malice in every detail. These were long, sharp stakes, made of hardened wood or iron, driven into the ground at an angle, pointing directly toward where enemies would step as they advanced. They weren't placed at random. Each stake followed a logic of spacing, direction, and tilt, designed to catch legs, knees, or moving bellies. The most legendary use of this tactic was in 52 BC, during the Siege of Alesia. When Julius Caesar faced the charismatic Gallic leader Vercingetorix, Caesar knew he was outnumbered. The Gauls surrounded his position and tried to break through the Roman lines at all costs. The solution: turn the ground into a minefield of pain. Entire zones were prepared with these stakes, buried to appear invisible from a distance. When the Gauls charged the Roman defenses, they stepped confidently where they shouldn't have. Feet were pierced, ankles torn, soldiers screaming as they fell onto sharp spikes that showed no mercy. And the terror wasn't just physical, it was psychological too. The screams of pain, the blood on the ground, the inability to run or reorganize under constant attack. Imagine seeing your comrade fall beside you, impaled by a stake that seemed to spring from the earth. Would you keep walking or hesitate for just a second? In war, 1 second is enough to die. Caesar didn't need more soldiers, he needed time. And with the Stimuli, he got exactly that. Time to weaken the enemy, to break their morale, to turn the tide in one of the most iconic sieges in Roman history. But if you think nothing could be worse than visible stakes in the ground, think again. What if the very earth betrayed you? During the Siege of Alesia, Julius Caesar went beyond stakes. He ordered his soldiers to create actual gardens of death. And no, that's not a metaphor. The name of this trap was Lilia. Yes, like lilies. Delicate, right? But in this case, the beauty of the name hid a camouflaged nightmare. The Lilia were conical pits, dug in a quinkings pattern, like the 5 dots on a die. At the bottom of each pit, a sharp stake was buried vertically, silently waiting for its victim. Roman soldiers covered the holes with dry leaves, light branches, a thin layer of soil, just enough so no untrained eye would notice the danger until it was too late. And when the foot sank, it was too late. Victims dropped with a sickening thud. The stake tore through flesh, trapping the leg, the hip, sometimes the abdomen. Some died instantly. Others were stuck, moaning, blocking the advance of their own allies. Instant chaos, the enemy would fall into panic. The most perverse aspect of the Lilia was the chain reaction. One man fell, another tripped over him, a third tried to retreat, and just like that, the charge turned into utter confusion. These pits were not improvised. They were an integral part of Roman military architecture, used both in sieges and in the defense of fixed structures, like Hadrian's Wall and the Antonine Wall in northern Britannia. In those distant frontiers of the empire, the Lilia protected legionaries from surprise attacks, especially at night. You could walk for meters thinking you were safe, until you fell into a custom-made grave. Can you imagine the desperation of being surrounded, watching comrades vanish into invisible holes, not knowing if your next step will be your last? It must have been terrifying, but the Roman underground arsenal had more surprises in store. If the Lilia were like precision traps, silent and deadly, the Sippy represented the opposite. Open brutality, tearing the earth like the planet itself wanted to devour those who approached. In high-risk zones, especially in front of fortifications or narrow passages, the Romans dug deep trenches, about 1.5 meters deep, carved in a W shape. Inside these trenches, they planted splintered trunks or cruelly cut branches, with jagged, sharp tips designed to mutilate anyone who fell in. These weren't random holes scattered around. The Sippy were laid in continuous rows, forming a long, almost hypnotic barrier that gave the impression the entire ground had been transformed into a living trap. And the effect was immediate. Enemy soldiers trying to cross this deadly corridor would lose their balance when jumping, stumble, fall, get stuck, wounded, vulnerable, exposed to the precise attacks of Roman legions positioned just behind. These trenches stopped the attack before it even began. Formations disintegrated as they tried to cross. During the Siege of Alesia, they were used as the first line of defense, an invisible wall made of pain. And in the most critical points of the empire, where night and treacherous terrain were enemies in their own right, the Sippy turned every meter the enemy advanced into a test of survival. And when the Sippy weren't enough to stop the advance, the Romans activated the next level of invisible terror, entrapment traps. Among them were the cervi. These devices were made of flexible branches, woven into hidden hooks that automatically snapped shut at the slightest touch. They didn't kill, but they immobilized with brutal efficiency. Soldiers were trapped, writhing on the ground, trampled by those behind, or struck down by arrows before they could free themselves. Horses stumbled, equipment jammed, entire formations collapsed without even understanding what was happening. The genius? They were practically invisible, camouflaged among vegetation or hidden between pits and trenches. They only revealed their presence when it was already too late. And as if all of this weren't enough, there was one final obstacle, or rather one final nightmare. The drowning pits, in prolonged sieges like Alesia, where every entrance and exit had to be controlled with absolute rigor. The Romans used water itself as a trap. Deep ditches, dug around the fortifications, were filled with murky, stagnant water. From the outside, they looked like simple barriers, but in practice, they functioned as drowning pits. Heavy infantry carrying shields and armor could barely make it through. Siege towers got stuck, horses froze, men sank and panic did the rest. These pits weren't just meant to stop enemies from entering. They were also used to prevent desertion for those who tried to flee. In the end, what the Romans built wasn't just a defensive line, it was an invisible battlefield, meticulously designed to destroy the enemy before they even had a chance to fight. These traps weren't there just to cause physical pain. They were mental weapons. They shattered confidence, dismantled order, sowed fear. All before the first visual contact with the Roman legion. When facing Rome, the enemy was marching against the terrain, against time, against their own fear. Now I want to know your opinion. Which of these traps do you think caused the most panic in an enemy army? Which one surprised you the most? Leave your answer in the comments. And if you enjoyed the story and want to see more epic content like this, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. In the video on your screen, we'll reveal the craziest battle tactics of the Roman army.